Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. This past weekend, a number of people in Omaha and Lincoln protested the second anniversary, I should say, of the U.S.-led coalition invasion of Iraq. Among the people in those rallies were members of Nebraskans for Peace. It was a big day for them, and a day they hoped wouldn't actually come, that wouldn't exist, but they are here, and they do so much more than just rally and wave signs. And I wanted to give you a chance to get to know them this week, at least 3 members of Nebraskans for Peace. With me today are Mark Vecina, he is the president of Nebraskans for Peace, Virginia Walsh with the group, and she has been involved in peace issues for many years. And also Tim Rinne, about 12 years with Nebraskans, about 12 years with Nebraskans for Peace.
That's right.
Your parents pronounce it Rinne, so I made a mistake. Okay, I've wanted to have you on for a long time because for years I have covered in the news media, demonstrations. It goes back to after the Vietnam War, or during the Vietnam War. And I always felt that you got sort of a bum rap in a way. Sometimes how the news media portrayed you, because I always seem to see people screaming and being upset. The other is that because you are in a minority in this state in particular, maybe you don't get a fair shake on getting a chance to kind of say where you stand, and that you're more than just a bunch of rallies. Is that fair to say?
Oh yes, definitely more than just a bunch of rallies. We have, although we started in the 35 years ago at the height of the Vietnam War as rural Nebraskans for Peace, people coming together for community and support in their opposition to the Vietnam War, we've over the years taken on many other social justice, economic justice issues, as well as maintaining a focus on peace and issues of American foreign policy. It
seems that some things, the more things change, the more they stay the same, Virginia. You've seen cycles repeat themselves over and over again, and it's got to be a little frustrating.
Well, what I like about Nebraskans for Peace, though, is that they work on changing structures to make a society that is less violent. And it's the repetition of the cycles of violence in our society that really gets me down. So I feel really content with Nebraskans for Peace, that we can try not necessarily to put Band-Aids on different kinds of problems, but to put real changes into political structures so that things can get better for real life people.
Okay, Tim, give us some, for instances, of the breadth of Nebraskans for Peace. Let's put some meat on these bones to give people an idea of some of the things that you've been involved with over the last several years.
Sure. Dr. Martin Luther King used to say that peace is not the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. And a lot of folks over the years have looked at us and say, why is Nebraskans for Peace involved with an issue like white clay? Or why are we involved in an issue like LB 775? What does that have to do with peace? Well, it's the whole notion that if you don't have justice in society, you're not going to have peace in society. And I know a lot of people may say that, well, in Nebraska, the reddest of red states, isn't peace like an alien life form there? All right? But in point of fact, I grew up in this state. I've spent 50 years of my life in this state now. Nebraskans really do care about a couple of things in particular that catch my attention. First of all, we're very independent. We think for ourselves. Secondly, we're a practical group of people. And thirdly, we really care about fairness. And so if an organization like ours can frame an issue that addresses those concerns, that focuses on those points, we have a chance of getting our voice heard. And given the state of the world, I think we could stand to hear a little bit more from our point of view.
What right now, other than the war, and we'll talk a little bit about that, are the kinds of things that you're still concerned about LB 775 and what may take its place if it's replaced, so to speak, and that is the common name given an economic incentive bill that was passed a number of years ago that larger corporations generally benefit from. We have other packages of things that help economic development. But what are some of the other things that you're doing right now to going along with that peace equals justice, justice
Right.
equals peace?
Thank you for asking that, because the thing I am so very interested in right now is our campaign against bullying in schools among school children. And that is an issue that, because I have 7 children and 12 grandchildren, I relate to very personally, but also because I believe that all of our children belong to all of us. And I think that if we introduce children during their early childhood into a world that is violent and unfair, then they are likely to grow up less peaceful than we would want them to be, either more silent and withdrawn, or in many cases they become violent persons themselves.
Well, we've just witnessed this past week up in Minnesota, a young man evidently felt a little displaced from his personal society, picked on, according to some of the news reports, and we hate to see that, but it plays out on a lesser, but sometimes just as emotional.
But in Nebraska, in the last, I'll say 7 years, we have had 4 deaths and 2 attempted suicides among youth under the age of 16 who have been the victims of bullying. So it is very violent. It is here. It is in Red Lake, Minnesota, and it is everywhere, I'm afraid. But it can be successfully reduced. There are programs that exist that will reduce school violence, and we would like to see those get incorporated into more of the school districts in Omaha, in Nebraska.
So you're kind of for a womb to tomb approach. And I'm not saying that to laugh at, but I mean that don't wait till something
Right.
Is on the grand or global scale.
As the twig is bent, I think, probably.
Probably true. Mark?
Well, Tim, I mean, can you talk a bit about Turn Off the Violence work that Nebraskans for Peace has been done? Because I'll pass it to Tim, but I mean, we do a lot of over the years have done a lot of work with these kinds of very local and general social types of issues where violence exists within our schools, within our communities. And one of the programs is Turn Off the Violence, which has developed somewhat into the anti-bullying effort.
Yeah, over the last 3 years, we have been focusing in the legislature on trying to get some anti-bullying legislation passed. And originally that bill was converted into a policy that the State Department of Education embraced, asking that every school district in the state adopt anti-bullying policy. Our sense over the past 2 to 3 years, though, is that given the budget cuts, given the strains on our school districts and so forth, that not a lot has happened with that issue. So we've come back this year with a legislative package that actually will mandate that school districts do this and start involving parents, start involving children, the community, get them involved in the process of how we raise our children and how we encourage them to behave. The whole premise of education is that we work on the assumption that we can change people, that we can instruct them how to read, how to write, and also how to conduct themselves. And what we want to do with this legislation is make sure that we're teaching children to behave civilly to one another, that it's not okay to pick on somebody because you think that they might be gay or you think they might be lesbian. And that is at the root of a number of the bullying incidents that we have had in Nebraska, is that you've had children who have been badgered over their sexual orientation or their assumed sexual orientation.
Well, let's go ahead, Virginia, we're going to say something.
Just to the point of desperation, oftentimes. And sometimes they have tried to go to teachers or administrators for help, and in the majority of cases they have not found help forthcoming of the cases that we know about. So that's why we're interested in helping school districts and school personnel to find the right words to deal with episodes that might be awkward for them otherwise.
Well, we had experience with that in my family for my son, so I know how crippling it can be to the development of a young child. Let's take that and let's let's say there are people that are very like-minded with you folks on the issue of bullying, but they say, well, I'm not going to jump on this Nebraskans for Peace bandwagon because I'm not a peacenik, and gee, if I get my name on their list, they'll want me to go protest. And the point I'm trying to make is there's a lot more that we all have in common in many respects, and maybe that's a good idea that we don't limit ourselves to certain organizations that we think fit everything, or we really won't be in many organizations.
There is always a wonderful place for people to start if they're in a position where they can find children to talk to just ask children if they know about bullying in their school system. Do they think it exists? It doesn't necessarily have to be a question about, are you a bully or are you a victim? But you can be a bystander.
Right.
And what do you do then?
They say that is one of the worst things. But I'm saying if I heard you on this show and I wanted to call down to the office at Lincoln and I just say, if I call Nebraskans for Peace, they're going to glom on to me and really I just want to kind of get involved in this bullying thing.
We might ask you to talk with your school authorities about how much of a policy they have, because they may have a policy against harassment or school safety or something that is akin to this but not exactly on point, and find out more things about that. And then I think we'll probably ask you to get in touch with your legislator.
I think,
but you're not going to ram peace and justice down their throat right out of the chute, are you?
I think you'd have to recognize that with any organization, and particularly what really is a grassroots type of organization, we're not a top-down controlled sort of organization. But with any organization, you're going to have people who are involved, interested in some aspect, some issue, some project, and may have little interest in some other area. We certainly never demand anything of our membership. We like to demand things of our board of directors who are involved because they share much of the common concerns that we have. But even on peace issues, beyond the kind of local school bullying sorts of things, the wars, the various interventions over the years that the United States has been involved in, there's a variety of opinions within our organization. Some of our members at some point may agree with an intervention approach. They believe that it's come to the final straw and it's time to do something militarily.
Even the issue of pulling troops out of Iraq, even if they were vehemently opposed to the invasion, to what happened, what our government did, but they may not all agree, or do they agree on?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, within our organization, you have a spectrum of points of view perhaps about peace issues philosophically in general, but on the issue of whether to pull troops out now or define an appropriate plan to work with the United Nations to devise an exit strategy that respects the situation we're in right now. I mean, we're part of our intervention is a major factor in what's wrong in Iraq right now, and we have to recognize that. But so there's a spectrum of ideas there, and we do try and use our newspaper, the Nebraska Report, to reflect a variety of opinions on the issues that we're concerned about. In some cases, in the past, we've had debates on issues of importance to our organization and our members, where one person takes one position, seemingly an opposite position from another position. It's all the time, and it's welcome.
You know, during the last election, we heard a lot about moral values, and it strikes me that there isn't. I always get calls when I say this, but no one has a corner on moral values. There's a variety of moral values that we all hold, but it's not like these are the most important ones. And they got sort of pigeonholed on what the moral values were in this last election. And does that bother you at all?
What bothers me is the fact that peace sometimes is considered a controversial issue, which seems to be really absurd, if not surreal, but there you have it. It is. And I attribute that partly to the fact that we are really we're under the influence of a kind of campaign for supporting the war. that is national in scope, and it's not surprising that people are very supportive of the war. I think, however, the people who lose family members, either complete loss of life or maiming of family members, they start to say things that are very emphatic, oftentimes about pulling out of Iraq now. And I think in our demonstrations, in fact, that's what we were quoting. In one case, I think we had the mother of a fallen soldier, and in another case, we read the letter from the mother of a fallen soldier. So those people have, I think, a rank and credibility that allows them to be heard by people who might not otherwise hear that.
And I've heard parents of fallen soldiers that and Marines that say, we have now changed our mind about the war, but you know, I don't know if we should pull out. I mean, what I'm saying is even within something, there is a spectrum, and I'm not saying one's better than the other, but even within a spectrum of how people are changing, I think people think you're all or nothing. You know, that Nebraskans for Peace is, you know, never met a nuke they liked. Not that I have personally ever met one that I was very fond of.
That may be fair, but I don't think in its 35-year history, Nebraskans for Peace has ever called for the dismantling of our armed forces. We've never called for what we've always asked at a minimum is that military actions, military interventions of whatever sort be a last resort. Pursue diplomatic, United Nations style, whether United Nations or United Nations style multilateral approaches to problems in the world, and pursue that. Don't jump the gun with what's a preemptive intervention when you have a country that has not attacked the United States, like Iraq. What's important, and one of the things we emphasized in our demonstration in Lincoln last weekend on the anniversary, was let's get the answers to questions that we all have about what we're doing there and why we're there. We know there are no weapons of mass destruction there. Many of us believe that that was well understood by the planners of this intervention, but that there was a spin to get Americans involved by talking about that. Let's get answers to these questions, and most importantly, I mean, we have two situations now. One is how to resolve the situation in Iraq, how to make it better. I mean, does it mean we pull the troops out now, you know, without any thought for the consequences? I don't think anybody is thinking that you just cut bait and run. The issue is how to devise a way to get out. And we don't see that coming from the administration right now. And the second issue is, are they going to take this model of preemptive military intervention, invading countries, because we think we don't, I mean, maybe there's a bad ruler, maybe they do things that we don't like. There are plenty of countries like that. Are we going to take the model of Afghanistan and Iraq, go in, invade a country, with Iran, with Syria, with other countries? I mean, this is the question. We don't think this is appropriate kind of foreign policy. You know, but this is all, since 9/11, this has all become a little topsy-turvy. We are become kind of a fearful country.
Yeah.
Some people would say that certain candidates or certain politicians have used fear as their trump card. Mm-hmm. We also have seen the United Nations not, there are a lot of United Nations naysayers, mm-hmm. and there are some that don't want to be naysayers but aren't seeing a very strong organization that will help with what we'd like to do in a peaceful world right now. They just don't have it within them. There's all kinds of complicated things that even people that want better answers, better solutions, are having a hard time finding how to go about it and what is the right answer right now. You know, do we trust the United Nations even if they did start getting their act together? You know, that kind of thing.
Well, we do know that our military presence in Iraq has lasted so long now that it's perceived as an occupation, not a conquest. We did that, it's over, but we have stayed on Now it's been almost all of 2 years. And that's an occupation, and that's fueling terrorism. So then we know we don't have the right answers. We've got to do something different.
Well, I think that there is a lot of fear on the part of, I say that word again, on the part of Americans that it was the right thing to do because we're going to stop terrorism, but there are also some beginning to think that did we solve any of the really immediate threats doing that? And I don't know how do folks like you generate more news coverage, more questioning. And there's a lot of people that say the news media, especially the national media, laid down and played dead when this whole invasion thing was unfolding. That they didn't push enough, and people think what they want on that, and it may well be true. In fact, some of them will even admit it.
Journalists.
Well, even before the embedding.
What does the word embedded mean? I mean.
Well, I'm not going to get involved with that because we'd probably disagree on that. But I mean, even before then, that they kind of didn't question the issue of weapons of mass destruction, et cetera, et cetera.
Let me do a plug here for the United Nations. We heard a lot of bad things said about them, that they weren't requiring Saddam Hussein to adhere to the UN resolution, and so therefore the United States had to go in and intervene in Iraq because the UN was irrelevant. What we found out is that we went in, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Guess what? Those UN weapons inspectors had done their job. All right? It had been successful. There were no weapons of mass destruction because those UN weapons inspectors had been doing their job, and President Bush had demanded that they be pulled out before we intervened because he didn't want them in harm's way.
The American people re-elected him knowing that full well.
No, actually I saw a poll the other day where it showed that there was still a sizable portion of the American public, and I'm talking 35 to 45%, that are still pretty much convinced that Saddam Hussein was involved in 9/11 and that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. What you had is you had this constant barrage of
Misinformation.
That's a term that comes to mind, yeah. Misinformation, okay, but at least faulty information, okay, if it was indeed a mistake made in good faith, all right, that was just repeated constantly. And what you're talking about here is when people get exposed to one particular line over and over again, and they're leading busy lives, and they don't have the opportunity to sit down and read the Washington Post and the New York Times and Newsweek and the Nation magazine and all this and spread it all out in front of them and sort through it, they can be led down a faulty path, which gets us back then to the issue of moral values. I'm not very comfortable with the fact that this country, in the wake of 9/11, and I understand how devastating that was, there's no question it has changed American life probably forever, all right? But in the wake of 9/11, we went into Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden, dead or alive. That was our motive for going in there. We didn't want to negotiate with the Taliban government any longer, even though they said, we will turn him over to you. We were going to go get him. Guess what? 3.5 years later, we ain't got him. In Iraq, we were going in to get those weapons of mass destruction because the UN hadn't done its job. Guess what? The war's over, the occupation isn't, but the war's over, and there were no weapons of mass destruction. Now, in the course of 3 years, you've had 2 wars, and you've got a credibility crisis going on here. And that bothers me from a moral values point of view. Is our government leveling with people? We have young people's lives on the line here.
Well, let me just, I'm not going to argue, I'm going to make a point that when I watch the presidential race unfold, and I watch a news network almost all the time because I work out of my home, I saw the news media cover the same speech, I mean it was an identical speech, of both candidates, day to day to day, although Kerry tended to react more to the headlines. And the news media kept repeating those for them, all those lines that Karl Rove and other people wanted. I mean, they did a darn good job. Joseph Goebbels would have been very proud of them. And I'm not saying that because they're Republicans. Democrats have not been good at being on point, whether it's right or wrong. But that is a fact, a political reality for the short term, and maybe even as long as I'm breathing, that politicians will try to deliver their message on point and get people to believe it.
Yep.
So, in that milieu, in that world, how do Nebraskans for Peace and others who are looking for new routes to peace and justice, how do they operate?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, we are the ones, we feel, I hope I feel as if we are the ones awake in a house wrapped in sleep, in a sense, because I know people recognize the dots, and our job maybe is to connect those dots in a coherent way and help people see the picture in a more independent way from the mainstream media, which I agree with you is oftentimes not critical of the national leadership.
I think some of them are even questioning themselves.
They are.
We don't set out to tactically to accomplish a specific goal. I mean, with regards to the war in Iraq or the occupation of Iraq, in a way that I guess we believe will affect our national policy directly. I mean, we're operating, first of all, in a statewide milieu, which is why we do spend a lot of our time focusing on statewide and local issues of peace and justice as well. But we see ourselves as having the responsibility to present to the people, and that means getting into the media, getting attention. A demonstration like last weekend is a good example. It was successful from our standpoint.
You got news coverage, and there are many times when you haven't.
Right.
Yeah,
Most times we don't.
Well, we do and we don't, but I mean, we take our lumps and we keep on going. But we had quite a number of people that came out that day in both Lincoln and Omaha. And of course, other organizations besides Nebraskans for Peace were also involved in putting this together and bringing people. But the message the messages that we put out there could be read about in the paper. They could be seen on television. And we know that without that kind of effort here, there would have been very little of that in front of people Sunday morning when they open the paper, or even Saturday night when they're watching the news.
We have only less than a minute left, and I guess my question is, that message, like as Karl Rove would tell you, has to be repeated and repeated and repeated. How does that happen?
Governor Johans, well, I should now say Secretary of Agriculture Johans, in a moment of displeasure, described us as Nebraskans for publicity. And we have done everything from hire a limousine and have people wear nylon stockings over their head to go rob the state treasury, to wear gorilla suits, to put people out in a straight suit to stand up and say things. That's what we have to do.
Well, this part of the publicity is over. We've run out of time, so I guess we'll look forward to more. But I guess what I want is that people should investigate and not just assume that you are this or that. Thank you for joining us this week, Nebraskans for Peace. Thank you for joining us on Consider This.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.